And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we make a perfect accompaniment for the pulled pork we did last week. This is Parker House rolls. These are these delicious dinner rolls that are chock full of butter. Now before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that we have an affiliate link with Chef's Temp. If you need a kitchen thermometer or meat probe, please check out the link in the description below, and use code LOVEYOURFOOD on checkout for 15% off your order. In the meantime, here's our ingredients. So we have some all-purpose flour, some potato flour, an egg, some milk, butter in 2 different measures because we're going to use them at different times, some instant yeast, some sugar, and a little bit of salt. So the potato flour is really interesting in this. It gives it kind of this interesting texture, this kind of springiness, and you can definitely smell the aroma. If you can't find potato flour, and there it is going into the mixer with the AP flour, if you can't find potato flour, you can use instant mashed potatoes for this as well. In goes the yeast, the sugar, which is basically there to feed the yeast, a little bit of salt, and we're just going to give that a good stir. Now everything in here is dry right now, so nothing is going to start reacting. The sugar, the salt's not going to really hurt the yeast yet until we get everything mixed together and give that yeast a chance to get mixed in with the flour and the sugar. So in goes some of the softened butter. Now we're going to retain the rest of the butter. We're going to melt that and use it to brush on, and you'll see why in a little while. So in goes the milk, and also in goes the egg. Now we're just going to crack this into a bowl to make sure we don't get any shell in there, and in goes the egg. Now you may wish to break up the egg yolk before you start before you start the mixer. We're going to start this on the dough hook, and we just want to stir this together until it comes together to a shaggy dough, which is basically just how it sounds. It's kind of the dough has all come together. You're, of course, going to have to scrape this down a couple times to make sure all that flour gets incorporated. But the shaggy stage it's a ball of dough, but it's got these kind of shaggy edges and bits coming off the sides. Once it has reached the shaggy dough stage, you're going to start a timer, and it's going to go for, I think it's about 8 minutes once it's reached the shaggy dough stage. So here we go, we're just about there. This is pretty much what we want it to look like. We've got a little bit of extra flour just kind of sitting at the bottom down there. We want to make sure that's all incorporated before we start that timer. And this is a bread. I mean, it's a dinner roll. You want it to be fluffy and light and tender, but you do want to have some gluten structure in there. So we are going to mix this for a little while because we do want to have, a little bit of tooth to it. So we're just going to make sure that all of that loose flour down there is incorporated, and then we're going to start our timer, and that's going to be 8 minutes of kneading with the dough hook. And if you're doing it by hand, you want to do it for about 10 minutes. So this is what it looks like when it is done, basically. So here we have our dough after the 8 minutes. You can see it's much smoother. We're going to get everything off of the dough hook, anything that's stuck to the inside of the bowl. You can see it has come away from the bowl quite nicely, actually. And it's all one, good piece. It's all continuous. It's all stuck together. You can see it's pretty yielding. It's nice and tender, but it does bounce back a little bit when you press it in. And then we want to let this proof. So we want to let that yeast do its thing. So we're going to grease the inside of the same bowl. We're just going to use the same bowl. There's no reason not to. And we're going to put that dough down in the bottom there and just let it rise and let that yeast do its thing until it is roughly double in size. So it's going to be, as you can see, Chef Caleb indicating there, about double the size you can see it now. Once it has doubled in size, we want to lightly grease a cutting board. We don't want to flour it because we don't want to, add too much more flour to this. And you can see how much bigger it is. It got much, much bigger, and it came clean away from the inside of our mixing bowl. And we're just going to punch it down a little bit, get some of those air bubbles out. Don't worry, we are going to let it rise and proof one more time before it hits the oven, and then we're going to cut this in half and do this in 2 halves. So we're going to take that first half, and again, we're just going to punch that down and flatten it out. Now this is a classic sort of dinner roll, and you want to be able to open it up really easily. So what we're going to do is once we've flattened it out, we're going to paint basically baste the inside with a little bit of that melted butter. And from there, we're going to cut this into the individual rolls. So we're going to cut that in half, and each half we're just going to fold over. Now, you don't want it to be perfectly overlapping. You want it to have a little bit of a lip. And when we put that into the pan later to bake, the lip is going to go on top. And that's just so that once it rises again the second time, it has a little bit of space, and the bottom is going to, take up that extra room, and it doesn't, pop open quite as much. So here you go. Chef Caleb is putting those into, again, a butter-lined pan. This recipe has a ton of butter. It's just full of butter. It's really delicious, but it has a lot of butter. So you can see here, we've got them all in there, and the overlapping part is on top. And we're going to just cover that loosely with some plastic wrap. We don't want it tightly covered because we don't want to put any pressure on it. We want these to rise. We want them to proof. And there you go. You can see they have fully proofed. They've risen. They're about doubled again. And those are going to go straight into our preheated oven. And then once those come out, and you can see here, they get a beautiful color on top. Once those come out, we want to basically immediately baste the top. We're going to paint the top with some butter again. And then once they are cooled, you don't want to eat them right away because they are extremely hot. But once they are cooled, you can see they've got that nice sheen on top from the butter you paint on at the end there. And they've got that nice crack in the middle where we painted the butter on before. And they're really nice. They open. You can see how nice and fluffy they are inside. And here's a great presentation that we did basically with the pulled pork from last week. So a little bit of that raw red onion, the pulled pork, which we've sauced here, and a couple of nice pickles. And on these beautiful, fluffy, tender rolls. And this is, a classic way to eat the pulled pork. These are so delicious. We found they toasted up really well as well. They are amazing and super easy to do. Just takes a little bit of time. You gotta let them rise. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. We'd like to thank all of our patrons over on Patreon. I'll put a link in the description below for that as well if you'd like to support us there. And remember to love your food.